Our Mixing with Mike mixing tip of the week is understanding the three compression zones. When working with any sound, essentially, I always look at three basic areas in working with a mix. So if we think about just having a sort of, I'm just going to draw a box here that's going to represent the highest signal possible. So let's just say this is our 0 dBFS, and let's just say this is just minus 20 or whatever the lowest end of it is. It almost doesn't matter, infinity if you want. And when I'm looking at a sound kind of over time here, I'm looking at three basic components to the sound. And the first component element are the peak signals. So these are the signals that are passing above this sort of imaginary threshold. So when these peak signals come up, they sometimes stand out too far from the main signal, and sometimes it's necessary for them to be controlled. Another way of looking at this is sometimes they don't stick out enough, in which case we can exaggerate them. So depending upon how you apply your dynamic processing, this is one where it's going to determine how aggressive a sound is, how upfront in the speakers it's going to sound. So the more attenuated it is, the more the sound will recede back in the speaker slightly. Then in the middle, there is what I call like mid-band compression. And the mid-band compression is really all the sustain, really all the meat of the sound, particularly with musical instruments. So most of the frequency spectrum, the fundamentals, the tonal character exists in this mid-band region. So this is where all the sustain of instruments occurs. So if you have like a bass note, for example, the peak will be the pick or the finger striking the string, but then the signal level will fall back down into this mid-range area where you have the sustain of the individual notes. And that's where the tonal character really comes out. Not so much in the attack because it's very quick, but in the sustain of the instrument. And then you have low-level compression. And the low-level area is most of the energy that dissipates rapidly. So generally what happens is if you look at frequency response of a signal for almost any instrument, say a guitar, when you strike the string, this is when you have the most high frequency energy. And so generally transients are more high and high mid frequency driven, particularly high mid frequencies. And that it can extend down into the mid range depending upon the instrument. But that's really what creates that initial transient peak. And then what you have here in the sustain area is low up through the mid range. So depending upon the instrument, and there are always exceptions, cymbals will resonate or radiate a lot more high frequency energy as part of their sustain, whereas a bass or a guitar generally won't. And then what we have down here at the bottom is also high frequency energy, typically, ambient energy. And so what happens is that when a transient peak occurs, we have mostly high frequency energy in that particular transient peak. And then we have mostly mid-range and low frequency energy during the sustain. And what happens is the high frequency energy, once it gets past this peak, typically dissipates very rapidly, while the mid-range tones and the fundamental frequencies of the instrument resonate throughout here. And the balance of harmonics over the frequency range help to give it its tonal coloration. And that's the basics of what happens here. So when this goes down immediately after the peak, this is what we get in the low band energy. So primarily we're looking at three forms of compression. We're looking at downward compression, so signals above this imaginary threshold here, which is generally a higher threshold setting, will trigger the compression. And then the attack and release settings will determine what part of the signal gets attenuated. In the mid-band here, we have it's still a downward compression with makeup gain. So the net effect of this is that what we're doing is we're kind of pulling these two areas closer to each other. So we're compressing the overall midband, but we're also bringing up the energy. And so in the process of doing that, we're also pulling up low-level energy along with it, bringing it closer to where the peak signals are. And so this is the idea of midband compression, and I'll show you examples of this. And then on the low end, then what we have is called upward compression. So we're taking signals that fall below a threshold, a very low threshold, and we're pulling them up so that the clarity, the high frequency presence adds that, comes back in to the regular sound. So the whole idea, in essence, is that we're pulling this downward. We're kind of putting this together, or kind of, not crushing, but pulling this together so that it can come up. And then we're also pulling this low frequency stuff up into here. So now what we're doing is we're sort of limiting the dynamic range, but making it more focused. So this is a general approach, and it looks very aggressive from the way that I'm graphically drawing it out here. But in this example, what I have here is this. I'm going to start with what I would classify as sort of a mid-band compression, and how you would set this up. So we just have a simple Renaissance compressor here. I'm going to go to manual release because I don't want it to necessarily be musical, but I want to have a fast attack and a very fast release. So I want that release to be probably less than 10 milliseconds, and I'll adjust it accordingly. And my attack will be, within a couple milliseconds or so, typically about less than 5, typically. And the tonal colorations here I'll just kind of leave off for the time being. The idea is that we have a very low threshold, so that the signal is basically everything from -40 on up is being compressed. So this is what's actually triggering the compression. But we're going to have a very light ratio, and this light ratio, we're looking for just a sort of target area of whatever sounds best, but generally like about 3 dB of gain reduction. And so we'll make up here automatically the 3 dB of gain reduction here. And what I really am looking for is a little bit of movement. So when the audio signal passes into here, whatever instrument it is, whether it's a bass or a vocal or whatever, what I'm doing is I'm getting it to basically compress and create some movement within an area, but the compression is really triggered by mid-band, more sustaining kind of signals. And what we can do here is when we do this, we can pull together the sound a little bit more so it becomes more tonally balanced. So remember, in the mid-band compression, that's what we were really talking about. So here in this example, just by doing it by eye, I'm going to adjust the ratio, and you notice that there's some movement here, and that's important. So let's listen to it without it first, and then I'll put some of it in so you can see what's going on.
There's a well-kept secret. I know many won't believe it. It makes your body much stronger, helps your life last longer.
And here's it in.
Better than any medication, cures any situation, frequencies and vibrations. That's the power of love. The power of love. The power of love. The power of love. Oh, baby.
So what you get is a more solidity. Okay, the sound becomes more focused, more tonally balanced. And, assuming, depending upon whether, you may not always need this, depending upon the source sound and how imbalanced, but particularly with sounds that have an odd tonal coloration, this will help to kind of balance that out a little bit. And so this mid-band compression helps to just kind of add solidity to the sound, make it a bit more focused. So like a frequency density kind of thing, right? Where you're kind of pulling everything together, making it a little bit more dense. The other one, and a very quick one to use here, is the Max Volume plugin. And this gives low-level compression and high-level compression. So this is the peak limiting from the top side down, and this is the low-level compression from the bottom side up. So if we are actually putting in this, what we'll do is we'll have a sound that...
There's a well-kept secret. I know many won't believe it. It makes your body much stronger, helps your life last longer. Better than any medication, cures any situation, frequencies and vibrations.
Now, there are two modes. One of the reasons why I like this is there's an aggressive sound. So if we wanted to be aggressive with the vocal and I put the loud setting, it'll pump and breathe more, the compression or limiting. Whereas in the soft mode, it'll slow down that release and be a little bit softer and more musical. So this is the loud setting.
There's a well-kept secret. I know many won't believe it.
And the soft.
It makes your body much stronger, helps your life last longer. Better than any medication, cures any situation.
So, and this is sort of a somewhat subtle effect, but what we're really doing is you're just kind of pulling the peaks down a little bit, and then this will kind of keep it, you know, a little bit more contained, a little bit more focused. Now this is where we really bring up the presence, and this is the low level energy. So it has a default of -96. So
there's a well-kept secret. I know many won't believe it. It makes your body much stronger, helps your life last longer, better than any medication.
So it's without it.
Cures any situation, frequencies and vibrations. That's the power of love.
So we're also getting an additional bit of gain here. So I'm going to pull this down a couple dB to kind of make up for some of the added gain. So with the low-level compression, what we're pulling up is the presence. You'll notice that the detail of the vocal, of the voice, really starts to come out. The articulations become much more pronounced.
There's a well-kept secret. I know many won't believe it. It makes your body much stronger, helps your life last longer, better than any medication.
And this is what it sounds like
Cures
bypassed.
any situation, frequencies and vibrations. That's the power of love. The power of love.
And I could go with a softer setting.
The power of love. The power of love. Oh, baby, the power of love. That's the power of love. The power of love. The power of love. Oh. What's the purpose of me holding?
So, so the idea here, and what we have is the bottom up, or the upward compression, low level compression, the downward high level compression, and then we also have the midband compression here. So if we do just a quick comparison here without and then with, I think you'll see what the overall effect is.
There's a well-kept secret. I know many won't believe it. It makes your body much stronger, helps your life last longer, better than any medication, cures any situation, frequencies and vibrations. That's the power of love.
So you can hear all the air and the presence that's added into this just by using these three effects. And this is without an ounce of EQ. So you can really feel more of the intensity of the vocal, the balance of the vocal, the realism of it, and really becomes focused and much more present. So the idea from here is that when you get it in this really solid place, you could basically put it at almost any level in the mix and you'll still be able to hear it. That's kind of the idea of how this works. And that's how you work with the three levels of compression, right? So the three compression zones, as I have here. So that's our mixing tip of the week from Mixing with Mike, understanding the three compression zones.